What is up, everybody? Super nice guy here, and today I'm here to talk about potentially the most boring topic you could ever think of, and that is grays. Typically, when someone says something is gray, they mean that it lacks any sort of emotion or color or anything that would evoke any sort of feeling. Well, I'm here to change that today. Today we're going to be talking about how to make even grays more unique and cater to individual tone and feel, and creating a more brandable experience or a more ownable color palette. Now that I just said the greatest introduction in the world, let's get into it. Alrighty then, so here we are with some different options for selecting gray values. I think typically people that haven't had a lot of experience with generating color palettes or they're new designers, they'll typically start with this first option here, which is just the neutral grays. You're just adjusting the lightness and darkness all the way from a pure black up to essentially a white or an off-white or a light gray. Now, there's nothing wrong with choosing these grays per se, but I feel like they are missing an opportunity to add in extra personality or tone or mood or anything like that. They are just neutral and they are just gray. So when something is said to be gray, I would say it's referring to these neutral grays. However, and actually we can quickly see here, I've highlighted the center middle swatch here and the saturation. This is a HSL 00 and then a 50% on the lightness darkness. But going down to the second row here, we have warm grays. And then obviously after that, we have cool grays because it's right here. But the warm grays, we can see the 50% swatch is a 0 on the hue, which is actually red, coincidentally, which we can see here. 0 is the red. The neutral, it doesn't actually matter where we place that hue number because the saturation's 0. It takes the color from the saturation. So here we're on 0, which is red, and we have just a little bit 4 on the saturation, and that is giving it this warmer tone. The warmer tones will typically, well, they feel warmer. So what is warm when it comes to color? Warm is more approachable. It adds a certain mood. It's the opposite of cold. Cold can also be interpreted as things like secure. It's a very secure color. That's why a lot of banks use blues and things like that. It can also be cold in a bad way where it's a little less approachable. But the warm is approachable, sunny, happier. You can think of any words that come to mind when you say warm to yourself: cozy, inviting, and so on. And so the warm grays look a little bit different. They get into more of a sandy or a desaturated coral color or something like that. And then the cool colors just feel more like, clouds or sky, a cloudy day, or the tones that you might see objects underwater in and things like that. So these sort of exercises help sort of explain what emotions and feelings and thoughts can be captured by just changing these saturations a little bit. So the last one here is cool. And the cool color tone, I have 220 on the color wheel, which is a blue, and then 8 on the saturation. All these are 50% lightness, darkness, but they all offer vastly different colors to something that you might think is very binary or black and white, which is it gray or not? And so here we've chosen 220, and that's where it lands on the color wheel, and this little dot does a great job showing exactly where this color is. But choosing colors is way easier again when you're using HSL because you're nudging these little amounts in ways that make sense or easy to wrap the mind around, and then you can systematically go from here and say, well, we want the lightness to go down 15 for each swatch and up 15 for each swatch, and the saturation will probably need to change as you go up and down the color scale so it's not too overpowering and there's a balance there. So again, I always use HSL to pick colors. When I was really beginning as a designer, I would kind of drag this dot around and find a happy place, and it was very frustrating. It's hard to move this thing and actually get finite little details with your colors, because here you can go in increments of 1 and 2 and and have these 3 different parameters. And then you have the alpha channel here, which is a whole separate thing. I wouldn't worry about that personally. I think colors should be fully 100% and not transparent. They should be fully opaque. And then lastly here, before jumping into some examples of real world case studies, I suppose, of what other designers are doing with other products, I've just taken the darkness of each one, the pure black, or it's not a pure black. I think no black should be pure. There's always a little bit of color going on here. And then we have the 50% swatch again, and then we have the lightest swatch. And so you can see vastly different colors by looking at these quickly. And just to show what I'm talking about here, this first neutral one, we have just 0, 0, and 10. And so I haven't gone all the way down to 0. There's a number of reasons why maybe not choosing pure black in user interfaces. Typically, it can be easier on the eye if you never go pure black, and then you balance that off with a not pure white. But if you go pure black and pure white, it can add a little bit more eye strain. It's a little too sharp. I think Apple's website, since Apple went with their dark website when they market things like the MacBook and the iPhone, they don't use a pure black or a pure white, so that's a good case study to look at. Then next, what we have here is the essentially warm black. It's a slightly warmer hue than the one above it. I will say with these, it's very difficult to perceive some of these. I think that's with good reason, because if you get these to be too saturated, to have these colors showing up in the black, it no longer appears to be a black. But when placed next to a family of grays, it then has this harmony. You can tell it's in balance. It's not standing out. It has the same color theme that the other swatches do. And then here I just have the pure black or the cool black. I suppose I always call my blacks cool black. I typically go with these cooler grays personally, but here we have 220, then 15, and then 9. So that was me illustrating just the basic approach to working with grays and what you can do with it. And it might still be a little bit difficult to wrap your mind around, and that's why I have some examples here that we're going to jump into right now. Okay, so maybe the first one that comes to mind here when you think of a blue brand or color palette, at least in this day and age, would be something like Facebook. Now, Facebook is thought of as being mostly white and gray because user interfaces typically of products and even a lot of websites that aren't super branded will take on mostly white and grays everywhere in the interface. Interfaces typically are white, gray, and a lot of text in the most basic sense. And then everything else on top of that, you can get pretty creative and change it. But at the very core, that's what it is. But with Facebook's grays, they're actually all partly blue. I have just a couple swatches here to look at. And again, this is just a screenshot. I believe it's the most recent Facebook design, or it's pretty close. But here we have a white that's clearly visibly a white, and then we have gray. And you might just think it's neutral, but looking at this closer, this is a great experiment to do if you're curious about how other companies are positioning themselves with their color palette. So Facebook continues the blues into their gray. And specifically here, we can see that their blue that they're using is 220 on the color wheel. I think that is consistent in everything they do, and that's just really their spot on typical blue. Their logo and their brand either at one point lived somewhere in here or it still does, although their logo uses a gradient, but this is typically 220 is the blue Facebook uses. So when you drop this on white, it just looks like gray, but when you reveal that, when you lift the curtain, you then see, well, there's 8 saturation on this 220 mark. And then looking at another gray tone, so actually the one on the right here matches this CTA gray that they're using, but the gray behind it right here is a little bit lighter actually. 220 on the color wheel. You know, why would that change? That's the same, that's their blue. But there's also more, there's almost double, there's 13 saturation the higher up in lightness it goes. So this darker one is only 90 and 8 saturation. Well, the higher color, because it becomes more washed out, we can then add more saturation in those higher colors. So 13 when we get up to 95. And again, there's a balance. It's a perfect harmony of grays. You don't think this one has more blue than the other, even though there is a substantial amount more saturation in that lighter value. So again, we can see that harmony when these are all laid out next to one another. This is a great exercise to do. This is something that goes way back to the beginnings of art school and design classes when you're learning about basic colors and even fine art and everything. You create this color gradation, this color wheel, and you practice balancing each hue from one to the next so that one swatch looks equally spaced apart or lighter or darker than either of the swatches next to it. It's a perfect balance no matter what point in this hue spectrum you're at. And then I have one more example here because it's a nice, good, and different one. There are obviously others out there, but this was one that is sort of relevant because everyone loves Notion, right? It's great. Well, so Notion doesn't use pure neutral grays either. You almost think, you can see that this is warmer in color, but these grays here, again, they look neutral almost. They don't look like anything special. But looking at them more closely, you can actually see what Notion has decided to do is go with a more yellow color. So the wheel, the little picker is way up in this upper right corner, but they're 40 on this color wheel. The hue is 40, 100% saturation, and 99% lightness, which means if it were 100%, no matter where it's at, it's going to be pure white. But because it's 99, there's just a hint of yellow. And so this is for sure more of this sandy and warm color, this off-white. It's maybe a more natural feel, like the color of actual paper. It has more substance to it. It feels more alive, you could say. And so this next tone here that I've picked out, this other gray, looking at this closely, we can actually see they've changed the hue. At least this color picker isn't entirely accurate. It's mostly accurate, but this could actually be what they chose. 45 in the hue. A lot of times when working with yellows, the different points of the color scale you do need to change and go into the warmer side slightly to keep from colors appearing gross and green and things like that. So that does tend to happen with these colors, but we have 20 for saturation and 96. So this is a substantial jump here, but this gray is very yellow is what this is telling us. So 20 on the saturation is very yellow. But again, when you pull it out of context and put it on another background, it just looks like a gray. But in a theme, in a collective color palette, it has a harmony and everything comes across as warmer. It's not cool, it's not neutral, it has personality to it. All right, well, I hope no one's feeling gray after that conversation, or certainly blue. If you're feeling blue, you're pretty sad. But no one says, well, if you're feeling red, you're feeling anger. So all of this, color theory, all this stuff matters. There's a lot you can do with even something as basic as grays. If you got something out of this video, or you even learned a thing or two, let me know in the comments. Give me a thumbs up, like the video, subscribe, do all that stuff to help me out. I guess that's about it. So until next time, Super Nice Guy out.